Just across the border from Vietnam lies a country whose pace of life is so slow it leaves many Westerners genuinely confused. In Laos, mornings do not begin with car horns or packed meeting schedules, but with cooking smoke, temple bells, and roads that seem to be in no hurry at all. But don't let that calm surface fool you. Beneath this unhurried rhythm are layers of life that make outsiders both curious and unsettled, from noisy border towns and daily customs far removed from Western norms, to social rules that, if placed in the United States, would spark serious controversy. What makes Laos unique is not wealth or modernity. It is the way a poorer society chooses to live slowly, quietly, and within limits very different from those accepted elsewhere in the world. And once you understand why Lao people live this way, this story stops being about what feels strange. It becomes a story about a cultural choice, one that quietly challenges how many of us think about our own lives. To understand why the rhythm of life in Laos feels so different, you have to start with the deepest foundations of this society, its history, its geography, and the way people learn to live within limits. Laos has no coastline. Much of its land is mountains, forests, and rivers. For centuries, difficult terrain and limited transport kept the country largely outside major trade routes. That isolation did not create wealth, but it shaped a way of life that was never driven by speed. While many nations measure progress through growth and expansion, Laos learned to survive through sufficiency. Small-scale farming, seasonal fishing, family-run trade, and community exchange became the backbone of daily life. When income does not rise quickly, expectations must adjust. Instead of chasing distant ambitions, people focus on what is close and tangible: family, community, and everyday stability. Buddhism plays a decisive role in shaping this mindset. In Laos, it is not just a religion, but a moral framework for society. From temporary ordination to honor one's parents, to the rainy season retreat, to village festivals, the emphasis is always on restraint, acceptance, and balance. For an American audience, where success is often tied to competition and breaking limits, this philosophy may sound like resignation. But for Lao people, it is a way to keep society from becoming overstretched under conditions of scarcity. This foundation explains why cultural differences, even those that spark curiosity or controversy, can exist alongside a society that is largely calm and cohesive. When life is not constantly pushed by speed and growth, social norms have room to develop on their own terms. From here, the story of Laos begins to unfold not as a collection of strange habits, but as a logical outcome of how people adapt to the world they live in. From that historical foundation and way of thinking, social life in Laos has formed very different spaces that sometimes seem opposite, yet coexist without erupting into open conflict. In small towns and border areas, the rhythm of life can change suddenly. Roads that feel quiet during the day become more active as people move, trade, exchange goods, and engage in temporary forms of business. These are places where social norms are more flexible, reflecting how society adapts to cash flow and practical needs. For many Lao people, these areas do not represent the whole country. They are more like necessary gray zones that allow a fragile economy to breathe. When formal job opportunities are limited, people are forced to use even the smallest openings to survive. What matters is how society responds. Instead of direct confrontation, most choose tolerance. As long as overall order is not broken, alongside these gray zones exists a very tight community life in villages. There, family honor, mutual respect, and the watchful eyes of the community carry more weight than any written regulation. Behaviors that might be seen as controversial elsewhere are often naturally restrained through kinship ties and long-standing customs. There is little need for heavy policing or complex laws. Society regulates itself through familiarity and shared responsibility. For an American audience, where life is clearly divided between public and private spheres, this way of operating can be hard to imagine. In Laos, that boundary is far more blurred. People live close to one another, know one another well, and therefore cannot easily separate themselves from the community. Personal freedom does not disappear, but it exists within the context of collective harmony. It is this interweaving of flexible gray spaces and a strong communal core that allows Laos society to maintain a sense of calm. It is not perfect, and it is not modern by Western standards, but it reflects a very distinct form of adaptation by a country that lives slowly within many limits. From this social structure, differences in how personal life and relationships between men and women are understood in Laos begin to take shape. For many outsiders, especially audiences in the United States who are used to clear standards and open debate, Lao customs can be easily misunderstood or viewed through a lens of curiosity. But within the local context, these practices follow their own internal logic. In many rural areas and villages, social relationships are tied more closely to family and community than to the individual. Meeting, courting, and marriage usually happen within familiar circles, where everyone knows each other's background. Oversight does not come from the law, but from the eyes of relatives and neighbors. This creates a soft form of control, where personal behavior is inseparable from collective honor. However, in border regions and trading hubs, these norms become more flexible. The flow of people, tourism, and commerce brings in outside cultural influences. Here, personal choices are viewed more pragmatically, shaped by livelihood and circumstance. What matters is that Lao society does not impose a single rigid standard everywhere. Differences are accepted as long as they do not disrupt overall order. For an American audience, this raises an important question. When living spaces are small and communities tightly connected, where is the line between personal freedom and social responsibility? In Laos, that line is not fixed. It shifts with context, location, and relationships. This approach helps reduce open conflict, but it also allows certain issues to remain unspoken. Instead of loud confrontation, society chooses silence and gradual adjustment. This is not weakness or carelessness. It is a survival strategy of a small nation, where harmony is seen as the foundation for stability in a world full of limits. Stepping beyond differences in social relationships, everyday economic life in Laos reveals a picture that is simple yet resilient. Markets sit at the heart of daily rhythm, not only as places to buy and sell, but as spaces to exchange information, maintain relationships, and sense the pulse of the community. In towns along the Mekong River and near border areas, markets follow the seasons, the water levels, and the flow of people. Goods are modest, mostly local produce, basic necessities, and familiar handmade products. The economy here runs on flexibility. When formal opportunities are limited, people rely on multiple small sources of income and piece them together into a livelihood. A single family may grow rice, raise fish, sell goods at the market, and take on seasonal work at the same time. Income is not high, but risk is spread out. This approach does not create rapid breakthroughs, yet it helps communities stay on their feet during hard times. For audiences in the United States, where high specialization often brings efficiency, this model may look unproductive, but under conditions of limited infrastructure and capital, it is a rational choice. The Mekong River functions as a lifeline. It provides food, transportation, and shared living space. In the dry season, sandbanks turn into gathering places for trade, rest, and social life. In the rainy season, the river sets the schedule for entire regions. People learn to live with nature's rhythm rather than trying to control it. This adaptation creates a sense of calm. Even when income remains modest, what stands out is the level of trust between people. Many transactions rely more on familiarity and personal credibility than on written contracts. In small communities, reputation becomes a form of capital. This mechanism allows everyday economic life to run smoothly without heavy regulation. From humble markets to the steady pulse of the Mekong, Laos demonstrates a way of living based on sufficiency. It is not flashy, but it endures. And in a world full of uncertainty, that endurance is a value not easily replaced. Alongside this simple economic life, the force that keeps Lao society from sliding into chaos is its deep spiritual foundation rooted in Buddhism. In many places, temples are not just religious spaces. They function as moral centers and informal schools for the community. Children grow up with morning chants, village festivals tied to the farming seasons, and stories that emphasize restraint, patience, and gratitude. One uniquely Lao tradition is temporary ordination as an act of filial duty. For many families, a son entering the monastery for a period of time is seen as a moral responsibility, not a rejection of ordinary life. That time teaches younger men discipline, the value of slowing down, and the meaning of inner sufficiency. When they return to daily life, they carry these values with them as a guide for how to behave in society. The Buddhist Lent season is another moment when society naturally adjusts its rhythm. Entertainment fades, alcohol consumption decreases, and attention shifts toward family and temple life. For an American audience, where religion is often a personal choice kept separate from public life, this level of influence may be surprising. In Laos, religion is not enforced by law. It shapes behavior quietly, through habit and tradition. This deep internalization helps ease social tension. When people are taught from an early age that greed and anger bring negative consequences, they are less likely to confront others aggressively. Conflict does not disappear, but it unfolds more quietly and with fewer explosive outcomes. Buddhism in Laos is therefore more than belief. It is a stabilizing system. It helps people accept their limits in a country with few material advantages, while preserving a sense of calm and continuity in everyday community life. When you look at festivals and community rituals in Laos, you begin to see how this society releases built-up tension without direct confrontation. These events are not just about celebration. They are spaces where social order is gently reaffirmed. In competitions, games, and symbolic ceremonies, everyone takes part, from local officials to ordinary villagers, as a quiet reminder that the community remains a single, unified whole. These rituals are deeply symbolic. Winning or losing matters far less than completing the ceremony in the right way and with the right spirit. Through this, society sends a clear message. Roles and status may differ, but everyone exists within a shared order that deserves respect. For an American audience accustomed to open competition and clear winners and losers, this symbolic way of managing tension may feel unfamiliar. Yet within the Lao context, it is remarkably effective. Festivals are also moments when rural communities reconnect after long periods of hard labor. People travel from distant villages to gather, exchange news, strengthen family ties, and gain social recognition. These connections function as an informal safety net, helping individuals survive difficult times without relying entirely on the state. What stands out is how closely these events follow natural cycles. The rainy season, the dry season, the rice harvest, and the flow of the Mekong River all determine when festivals take place. When life is anchored to nature, people are more willing to accept uncertainty. They understand that not everything can be controlled, and that patience is part of survival. Through these rituals and celebrations, Laos reveals a way of maintaining social order without heavy reliance on rigid laws. Instead, stability is sustained through shared culture, tradition, and belief. This softer system allows society to remain calm and cohesive, even when material conditions are limited and the future remains uncertain. Placed within a rapidly changing regional and global context, Laos's slow pace of life is now under new pressures. The internet, tourism, and cross-border capital bring opportunities, but they also erode layers of traditional protection. In cities and tourist hotspots, young people are increasingly exposed to outside lifestyles, broader personal choices, and different expectations for the future. This contrast creates a growing gap between generations. For many young Lao, living slowly is no longer an innate virtue but a conscious choice. They cherish the peace of their homeland, yet recognize limits in employment, education, and income. Many leave their villages to seek opportunities in urban areas or work abroad, sending remittances home. While this income helps families improve living standards, it also reshapes social structures as the most active members are absent from the community. Tourism brings new revenue, but also tests the preservation of cultural identity. When cultural spaces become attractions, The line between conservation and commercialization blurs. Laos faces a familiar dilemma for opening societies: how to take advantage of opportunity without losing the foundations that have kept life calm for so long. For audiences in the United States, this is a relatable story. Globalization brings convenience and choice, but demands continuous adaptation. Laos demonstrates a different path, where change happens slowly and selectively to avoid major social shocks. Yet the pace of the wider world waits for no one. It is at this intersection that Laos's future is being shaped. Between preserving familiar rhythms and opening new pathways, the society must find a delicate balance, not to become like the rest of the world, but to endure sustainably in a world that changes every day. As the story draws to a close, what Laos leaves behind is not the initial sense of strangeness or curiosity, but a deeper reflection on how people choose to live within their limits. This is not an ideal society, nor a model to replicate. Laos simply stands as evidence that a country can endure and maintain relative calm by following paths very different from familiar standards of development. In Laos, slowness is not always a conscious choice, it is often the result of economic and historical conditions. Yet from those circumstances, people have learned to build values that fit their reality: less ambition, less confrontation, but stronger bonds with community and nature. This does not erase hardship, but it helps society avoid many of the shocks that often accompany rapid development. For audiences in the United States, where success is often measured by speed and scale, this story can be puzzling. It raises the question: does a society really need to always move faster, bigger, stronger, to be considered better? Laos shows that some communities consciously choose to go slowly in order to preserve balance, even if that comes at the cost of lower income and fewer opportunities for rapid advancement. Yet that choice now faces challenges. The outside world is closing in, and traditional values cannot remain unchanged forever. The question is no longer whether Laos will change, but how it will adapt in ways that preserve the social cohesion that has held for generations. In the end, Laos does not tell a story of strangeness. It tells a story of adaptation, of how people find meaning in the circumstances of their lives. And sometimes, it is these slow-living societies that make us pause and ask ourselves whether we are moving too fast. And as we close the journey into life in Laos, what lingers is not the initial curiosity or surprising details, but a profoundly human question: what are we truly seeking in modern life? More choices, more conveniences, or a lasting sense of peace even if it means accepting limits? Laos does not offer a single answer, but it shows that some societies have chosen to prioritize harmony over relentless acceleration. In an increasingly noisy and polarized world, Laos's slow pace acts as a mirror. It does not deny the desire to advance, but it reminds us that development without balance can erode the fundamental connections between people. When community, rituals, and shared beliefs are fully replaced by competition and self-interest, the cost often only becomes clear years later. For an American audience, this story is particularly thought-provoking. A society can be very free but highly stressful, or less flexible but more cohesive. No model is perfect, and every choice carries long-term consequences. Laos illustrates an alternative way of existing, where people learn to live with limits rather than constantly trying to overcome them. Ultimately, the greatest value of this story is not judging Laos as right or wrong. It lies in forcing us to look at ourselves. In the rhythm of life we pursue, what are we leaving behind? And could slowness, if consciously chosen, become a strength rather than a weakness in a world that never stops moving?